China has just sent one of its most powerful property tycoons to prison for life. Hui Ka Yan, founder of Evergrande and once one of Asia's richest men, will spend the rest of his life behind bars, and authorities have confiscated all his personal property. His companies also face 15.82 billion yuan in fines. Evergrande carried more than $300 billion in liabilities, and its collapse exposed one of the biggest weaknesses inside China's economic model. The real question is what Beijing is telling investors, homeowners, and developers with this sentence. To understand the message, you have to understand how Evergrande became enormous. Hui founded the company in 1996 and built it through an aggressive formula: borrow heavily, buy land, build apartments, sell them, and use new financing to keep expanding. Evergrande became China's biggest property developer. Hui's personal fortune reached an estimated $45 billion in 2017, making him Asia's richest person. Then the model hit a wall. In 2020, Beijing introduced restrictions designed to curb excessive borrowing by property developers. Evergrande could no longer refinance its debts as easily. It sold properties at steep discounts, but the cash could not cover its obligations. In 2021, Evergrande defaulted. A Hong Kong court ordered its liquidation in 2024. Its shares were removed from the Hong Kong exchange in August 2025. Hui's life sentence closes one chapter, but it reveals three bigger stories about China's economy. First, Beijing is making an example of the man who became a symbol of debt-fueled growth. Evergrande did not merely fail because the property market slowed. Chinese regulators and courts accused Hui and his companies of serious financial crimes. During his April 2026 trial, Hui pleaded guilty to multiple charges including misuse of funds, fundraising fraud, illegally taking public deposits, securities-related fraud, embezzlement, and corporate bribery. The court said Evergrande's conduct seriously disrupted the property market and caused major economic losses. One allegation explains why ordinary Chinese families suffered. Evergrande collected money from people who had paid in advance for homes that had not yet been completed. Instead of keeping enough money available to finish those apartments, funds went into other developments. When financing dried up, hundreds of projects were left unfinished. Beijing's message is blunt. Being too big, too famous, or too connected will not protect a corporate leader if the state decides his business model has crossed the line. China wants entrepreneurs to understand that growth at any cost is no longer acceptable. And that leads to the second revelation. Evergrande's collapse was not just a corporate failure. It exposed how deeply China tied its economic growth to property. Real estate-powered construction, employment, household wealth, banking activity, and local government finances. Property-related activity accounted for roughly a quarter to a third of China's economy, depending on what is included. Local governments also relied heavily on land sales for revenue. Developers borrowed money to buy land. Buyers borrowed money to purchase homes. Banks lent into the sector. Local governments sold more land. Rising prices made households feel richer, encouraging even more property investment. Evergrande was one of the biggest machines inside that cycle. When it broke, confidence broke with it. Other developers then faced defaults, falling sales, unfinished housing projects, and weaker access to credit. Chinese households became more cautious about buying property. Falling home prices damaged household wealth. Local governments lost revenue. Weaker construction activity dragged on growth. That is why Hui's sentence cannot repair the property market by itself. Punishing the person at the top may satisfy the demand for accountability, but it does not rebuild buyer confidence or restore the value of millions of homes. And that brings us to the third and most important revelation. Beijing is trying to separate China's economic future from the property boom that made men like Hui extraordinarily rich. The government has redirected capital toward advanced manufacturing, electric vehicles, batteries, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and other high-tech industries. The property crackdown fits into that larger transition. For investors, the calculation changes. China still wants private companies and entrepreneurs to create wealth, but Beijing has made clear that private capital operates within political and regulatory boundaries. A company can become enormous and still lose state support if its debt threatens financial stability or authorities believe executives broke the rules. Hui's earlier punishment already signaled that shift. In 2024, China's securities regulator fined him about $6.5 million and banned him from the capital market for life after finding that Evergrande had overstated revenue by roughly $78 billion. Today's criminal sentence goes much further. It warns other heavily indebted developers. The era of endless borrowing, rapid expansion, and rising property prices is over. Beijing can punish the people who helped create the crisis, yet it cannot imprison the economic problem itself. China still faces enormous property sector debt, weak confidence, unfinished homes, distressed developers, and households that no longer assume housing prices will rise forever. Evergrande's liquidation also shows how difficult it is to recover money from a collapsed property empire. Creditors have spent years trying to recover assets from a company that once looked unstoppable. For Asia, this matters because China's property downturn affects demand across the region. A weaker Chinese construction sector means less demand for commodities, machinery, industrial goods, and other imports. For global investors, the lesson is clear. China remains powerful, but its growth model is changing. For the West, Hui's downfall offers an uncomfortable comparison. Major economies face consequences when cheap credit, asset prices, and excessive leverage reinforce one another. Evergrande shows what happens when that cycle becomes too large to sustain. The life sentence, therefore, matters far beyond one courtroom in Shenzhen. Hui Ka Yan built Evergrande on the basic assumption that tomorrow's growth could always finance today's expansion. China's government spent years allowing that model to flourish, then moved aggressively to dismantle it when the risks became too large. That shift now shapes how investors judge China's private sector and future growth. Now, the billionaire is gone from the boardroom, his fortune has collapsed, his property has been confiscated, and his company has become a warning rather than a success story. For markets watching from outside China, the final lesson is simple. China is not just punishing the man who built Evergrande. It is putting the entire era of debt-fueled property growth on trial.